Hey there, and welcome. So, we're going to get into something huge today, this radical new idea for how we can solve our most complicated, most frustrating problems. But here's the thing. After years of trying, is this new approach actually working? Well, we're going to find out, and we've got a pretty fascinating report card to guide us.
I mean, just think about the biggest challenges we're all facing. Stuff like public health crises, climate change, you name it. Why do they feel so impossible? It's like no matter what we do, they just stick around. It really feels like we're trying to use old, outdated tools for problems that are way more complex than anything we've seen before. Today, we're going to explore exactly why that is and what we might be able to do about it. So here's our game plan. First, we'll get a handle on what makes a problem truly wicked. Then, we'll check out the big idea for how to solve them, shifting from these old, rigid structures to more flexible networks. After that, we'll see how researchers put this whole thing to the test, look at the pretty surprising results, and then wrap up with a final verdict on what it all means for the future.
Okay, let's dive right in. First things first, we need to really understand the beast we're trying to tame. So, what in the world is a wicked problem?
This term actually goes way back to 1973 from a couple of researchers named Riddle and Weber, and they realized, hey, some problems aren't simple math equations. A wicked problem, well, it has no easy answer. It involves this messy web of different groups who are all arguing with each other. And, this is the real kicker, solving it means people have to actually change how they act. Right, so here's the bottom line. You can't just hand off a wicked problem to one government department and say, fix it. Think about improving public health. That's not just a job for hospitals, right? It's schools, city planners, food companies, community groups, everyone. Any single top-down solution is pretty much doomed from the start because the problem itself is tangled up in our entire system. So if the old way of doing things doesn't cut it, what's the alternative? This brings us to the big idea, a pretty fundamental shift in how our public institutions work, moving away from hierarchies and toward networks. And this isn't some new fad. For the last couple of decades, there's been this massive international push toward this new model. It kind of started with this idea of the hollowing out of the state, where governments began to contract out their work. In response, this new philosophy called network governance really took hold across the US, the UK, and the EU as the new best way to handle these really complex issues. And this slide just lays out the difference perfectly. The old hierarchy model, it's all about top-down control inside one organization, like a pyramid. But the network model is flat. It's about working together across different groups, using negotiation instead of just giving orders. The whole thing is designed to be flexible and adapt on the fly, which is exactly what you need for a wicked problem. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. After years of everyone saying this new network model was the future, some researchers decided it was time for a reality check. Has this huge experiment actually paid off? Have we really made the switch from hierarchy to network? To figure it out, they went right into the heart of one of the most complex systems on the planet, the UK's National Health Service. They did a really deep investigation into 8 different public health networks, tackling everything from cancer care to sexual health, to see if this big transition was actually happening on the ground. And they basically created a test, a report card, you could call it. They said, look, for a real shift to a network to happen, you need to see big progress in 3 key areas: sharing technology to connect everybody, sharing learning to solve problems as a team, and sharing leadership to steer the ship. Okay, so the stage is set, the test is ready. How do these real-world networks actually do? Well, the results were not what anybody was expecting. It was a very, very mixed report card. And here it is, the absolute core finding of the whole study. On shared technology, pretty much no change. On shared learning, honestly, a big disappointment. But on shared leadership, a surprisingly significant shift. So 2 failures and 1 major success. Let's break down what that actually means. First up, technology. The big promise was that modern IT systems would just magically connect all these different agencies, let them share data, work together seamlessly. The reality? Yeah, that just didn't happen. The roadblocks were literally everywhere. You had university and hospital computer systems that couldn't even talk to each other. Brand new critical patient registers had to be filled out by hand. Shared databases were so inaccurate they were basically useless. The tech that was supposed to build bridges just ended up being another wall. All right, next on the report card, shared learning. This is the whole idea that these different groups would pool their knowledge, learn from each other's mistakes, and come up with solutions together. Here again, the researchers found the results were pretty disappointing overall. But it wasn't a total wash. In some cases, like these genetics parks, different groups just couldn't get on the same page. Academics and doctors had totally different ideas about what good research even looked like. But in other networks, like the Urban Cancer Network, it was a huge success. They learned from their past failures and were able to effectively share their expertise. So this shows that learning together is really hard, but it's not impossible.
And that brings us to the one area of clear, undeniable success: leadership. The study found a real, significant shift away from that old-school, top-down boss in an office style to something new and way more collaborative.
Wow. This quote from a cancer network manager, it just says it all, doesn't it? The new leaders weren't just bureaucrats. They were often doctors and managers working side by side in small teams. They were driven by a personal passion to make things better, a lot of times because they'd seen how broken the system was through their own families. They led through influence and credibility, not because of a title on their door. Okay, so we've got one big win and two major disappointments. What does this all add up to? Let's get to the final verdict from this whole report card. The key conclusion here is that we haven't seen some total revolution. We don't live in a world of pure networks now. Instead, we're stuck in this hybrid state, a messy, evolving mix of the old command and control structures and these new network ideals. And this is really the most important takeaway of all. Yeah, the transition is incomplete. It's facing huge problems. But despite the mixed results, the researchers argue that this network approach is still the most compelling, most promising way we have to tackle those wicked problems. Pulling the plug on the experiment now would be a massive mistake. And just remember, this isn't just theory. This conclusion is coming from the real-world experiences of 8 different networks. 8 messy, imperfect, hybrid experiments out there on the front lines of public health, and each one of them tells part of this really complex story. The paper ends by calling these networks a nascent solution, basically an idea that's just starting to sprout. And that leaves us with the final and maybe most critical question. In a world that always wants a quick fix, are we patient enough to give this solution the time it actually needs to grow? And maybe, just maybe, solve the problems that matter most?